plan for itself and given a complete environment. So the question then comes is automated planning preferred in such remote human-robot teams? So there are many ways this effectiveness claim cannot hold always. These are some of the factors that could potentially reduce the effectiveness of such automated planning in human-robot teams. One is the trust factor, which I mentioned previously. The humans may not feel comfortable in operating with the robots at such a level of autonomy, then there could be a trust factor involved. And there seems to be also another factor called information asymmetry, which arises in such scenarios. Dynamic environmental influences and other things seems to import such knowledge gap between the robot and the human counterpart. There are certain things which cannot be completely modeled into the planning model of a robot operating inside the scenario, whereas it would be easy for the human to infer certain things and then translate it directly. So there exists information asymmetry and task incompleteness, which could question the effectiveness of such robot teams. So in my study, I perform a human factor analysis on the effectiveness of automated planning technologies in such human robot teams. So I use a simulated urban search and rescue scenario to carry out my investigations, and this is kind of an overall picture which gives us the simulated environment, which is created using a simulator called WebBots. I would explain the environment in detail here. The urban search and rescue scenario is divided into several segments, wherein each segment would represent the room which the robotic teammate would search for. The human counterpart is essentially acting outside the simulator, wherein he is controlling the robot working inside the simulator. As you can see, the rooms are connected through doors, and the doors are initially closed and they remain open as and when the robot pushes it. And the actions that the robot agent supports are move from a segment to another segment, push the door open, and report. Wherein report is like the experiment is supposed to run for a certain duration. In our case, it's like 20 minutes, and the human controller is to guide the robot to search and report as many rooms as possible. This is the current environment in hand. And so as to, given such a kind of a scenario, as I said previously, there may be information asymmetry between the human and the robot counterparts. In our case, the information asymmetry is through the incomplete task information, whereas this is the map of the urban search and rescue scenario before the disaster occurs. So this map might not always hold when the experiment is occurring. So we simulate this in such a fashion that there are certain doors which are blocked in the environment, and this information is not known to the robot operating inside the environment. Whereas this information would be given to the human counterpart as and when the experiment starts. See to that even if some door is blocked, it might still be of interest to visit and report it through other doors since it is interconnected. And the humans might, in the real urban search task scenario, the human would be receiving certain information that he needs to parse and use it inside the environment. We simulate this by having him do a secondary task apart from just searching through and reporting the rooms. We use three-dimensional visualization puzzles as a secondary task that the human operator must do apart from just controlling the robot inside the environment. And
what is ABCD?
This is the option that the human controller needs to choose. This is kind of the question, and this is kind of the responses that they need to give.
Who needs to give that response?
The human controller, who is also controlling the robot. They will be given some number of tasks like this, whereas they need to figure out which mapping corresponds to which of these structures.
So what's the correct answer there?
It's too.
He cannot multi-process. Too much cognitive load.
What's this one?
Right? Yes.
Yeah, it's A, because the first level is of a height 2, 1, and the other layer the height is of 1, 2, and 1. We have some special.
Oh, so these are completely different.
Yeah,
Okay.
this doesn't correspond to this. This is just a secondary task
Right.
which the human controller is given so as to engage him in not only in controlling the robot but also in solving some
Okay.
puzzles. Yeah, this is completely different.
Okay.
It's like a video game on the side. Yes.
And this is kind of the interaction interface that the human controller uses to operate the robot. And this is the view that the human controller gets from the eyes of the robot operating inside the environment. He happens to see only the partial environment that the robot sees, the robot can see. And in the first case, wherein we have a supervised teaming where the human controller works with the robot that does not have a planning capability. However, in the case, given a current state, let's say if this is the current state, the robot can still, based on the current state, give the list of all possible actions that the human controller can choose at any instance. For example, if this is the current state of the robot, then the robot gives him with a list of actions, say push the door from this segment to this segment, and some things like that. Whereas the only difference between the peer-to-peer teaming is that the robot has its own plan and it also recommends action that the human controller can choose by mentioning a recommended action that the human controller choose. See to that, however, the human controller is free to either go with the recommended action or to simply choose his own actions. In the first case, in supervised teaming, the robot comes up with this list of actions and it waits for 10 seconds for the human controller to respond back. And if the human controller is not going to select any action, it is going to wait in a loop until he responds with the actions. Whereas in the peer-to-peer team, the robot waits for 10 seconds for the human controller to intervene and select an action. If he doesn't do that, it automatically chooses the recommended action, wherein the computed planned action, and it carries on. So this is the automated planner component which I used for the experiment, which is again an off-the-shelf planner. So given an initial state and a goal, it uses the agent's action to compute a plan. So I evaluate the effectiveness of automated planning in this human-robot teaming scenario through two hypotheses. The first one is that the robot with the planning capability reduces the human teammates' mental workload, and it also reduces the situational awareness. The second hypothesis that I evaluate is robot with the planning capability enables more effective teaming, wherein by effective teaming I mean it reduces eventually the interaction between the human controller and the robot inside the environment. I evaluate these hypotheses through both objective as well as subjective measures. In the objective performance, I consider several factors. One is the primary task performance. Here, as you could see, the number of rooms that the human controller can make the robot to visit is basically the primary task performance. This is the detailed graph on the primary task efficiency, wherein if you could see, I consider another kind of a team which is called the peer-to-peer non-interactive mode. As I mentioned previously, the peer-to-peer team, the robot in a peer-to-peer team waits for 10 seconds for the human to intervene and give his inputs. But if it is going to not stop at all for the human intervention, however, there is some doors which are blocked. It can traverse the environment but get struck and learn that this door is blocked and continue searching and reporting. So this is such a kind of team wherein there is no interaction of the human considered. As you could see, the supervised teaming does not significantly differ as I said, the primary task efficiency is basically the number of rooms that the team happens to report. There is no significant difference in the supervised team and the peer-to-peer non-interactive mode team. Whereas there seems to be a significant difference in the number of rooms that the human and as a team reports in the peer-to-peer versus the supervised teams. And for the secondary task performance, I use both the time the human controller spends in working on the secondary task. This is where the secondary task comes in. So this is where the secondary task actually comes in. So we evaluate both the time he spends on working on the secondary task as well as on the accuracy of such secondary tasks. To avoid participants from guessing correct answers, we had a negative score on the wrong answers that he gave. So we evaluated both the time on secondary spent on, that the human controller spends on a secondary task seems to be significantly different for the peer-to-peer team when compared to the supervised team, thus giving us a picture that the human had more time to work on secondary puzzles, not rather than just focusing only on the primary task, which is reporting the rules. And also the accuracy of secondary tasks, wherein the correctness of secondary tasks also showed a significant difference for the peer-to-peer team when compared to the supervised teams. And I also measured RAD and fan-out, wherein RAD is essentially a robot's attention demand. This is the percentage of time that the human controller spends in interacting with the robot. So, as you could see, that seems to be a significant difference in robot's attention demand, wherein the human teammate in the peer-to-peer team often happens to interact with the robot less frequently than with the supervised teams. And there is also an interesting measure called fan-out, which is kind of an inverse metric for a robot's attention demand. This gives us a picture on the number of maximum robots that the human can handle simultaneously, which is kind of an inverse of the robot's attention demand. So in our case, it's resulted out in such a fashion that the peer-to-peer team, wherein the robot had a planning capability, enabled more fan-out, wherein the humans can operate with such automated planned robots more than the other vice versa one. And I also measured the skipped actions, wherein here's the graph for it. As I said, the human can, in the second team, that is in the peer-to-peer team, the human can either go and interact in the given 10 seconds to change the robot's current action, or he can leave the robot to choose the current action and execute. So this gives us in 2-minute time frame, this gives us the number of times that the human actually skipped from making a selection. So as you could see, in initial and while the experiment arrives at an end, he is more cautious to give out the actions for the robot by himself rather than relying on robot completely. As and when the experiment proceeds, he gains a trust and mutual understanding on the robot with which he works on, and the number of skipped actions seem to increase significantly. So this also gives us an idea that as and when the task proceeds, the human might experience a significant reduce in the mental workload since he trusts the robot, since he invests trust in the robot. And having said about the objective measures, I also measured the subjective through Likert scale questionnaire, wherein we had in the scale of 7, where 1 is strongly disagree and 7 is strongly agree. Once the participants completed the experiment, they were given out the subjective Likert scale questions, and they were asked to rate based on their experience as the teammate. I would explain in detail about these questions and what they correspond to in the sections that follows. And for the mental workload, we asked questions on how the human teammate felt ease on working with its robot's counterpart, and how the participant felt on their mental workload when they interacted with the other robot in the environment. And it seems to suggest that there is no significant difference for mental workload in both the teams. However, we expected the mental workload to be reduced in the experiment. This seems to be an interesting result, and this is due to the fact that the task that we are currently considering is a short span task, and if the duration of the task is going to be more, then eventually the human controller can best his trust in the robot, and the mental workload can show some significant difference. However, in the current scenario, given that it's a short span task, there is not much significant difference in mental workload. And for situation awareness, we had questions on how aware were the human participants about the current robot teammate's position, and it also seems to suggest that there is a decrease in the situational awareness with the peer-to-peer team. However, it is not so significant. We also expected the significant decrease in situational awareness, but this is not the case. And this may be due to the fact that in the peer-to-peer team, the robot seems to provide recommended actions, which seems to give a situational awareness to the human counterpart in the team. And we had questions on effectiveness, likability, complacency, trustness, improvability, and immediacy. And these were the questions that we kind of used to evaluate these measures, these factors. And as you could see from the graph, the effectiveness, likability, complacency, and trust showed a significant difference between the supervised and the peer-to-peer human-robot teams. Whereas the improvability factor, wherein we had questions on, did you feel that there is a need for improving the robot teammate that you could work on, did not give us a significant difference. How this may be due to the fact that the human participants were not aware of the other team that they could potentially work with. So they thought this is kind of they had no expectations on the robot teammate.
Are you saying because it was a within subjects design?
Yeah,
It wasn't within subjects, it was between.
Between subjects, yeah, and the subjects were not, the subjects can take only one of the cases, and they are not allowed to participate more than
It's the
once.
same with mental workload and situation awareness. And in situation awareness in particular, if you're not, subjective measures are a little bit iffy there, because if you're not situationally aware, the chances are you don't know it.
So here are the general results from my study one. The results are partially consistent with the evaluated hypothesis, which is like the task performance wherein both primary as well as secondary task performance was higher in the peer-to-peer teaming, wherein the robot had a planning capability in itself than supervised teaming. And it also suggested that the peer-to-peer teaming may not reduce mental workload in a short-term task, which is kind of evident in our experiment, whereas we need some experiments to test in some long-term task on how effective is the mental workload contributing to the teaming effectiveness. And it also suggested that the situation awareness is also not significantly reduced in peer-to-peer teaming, wherein the robot had a planning capability. Having this study done, then the second question that arises, as you could remember from the human-human teaming, is that the human agents proactively support the other human counterparts in the team. So the other question in hand is that is the proactive support from the robot in such remote human-robot teamings preferred? So to define proactive support, first the definition of active support goes as is. The robot, when asked for certain things to be done, it helps the human counterparts, which is kind of obvious as it actively supports the human as and when the help is needed. As and when, when it comes to proactive support, the robot needs to be assisted in such a fashion that it infers the goals and intents of the humans, and it must take a goal and devise a plan in such a fashion that it helps as a team, so as to improve the team utility. So the question in hand is proactive support from the robots in a human-robot team preferred? So there are several factors here too which can effectively reduce the effectiveness when we have a proactive support component built into the robot in a human-robot team. Again, that's a trust factor. With autonomy, there comes both negative as well as positive influences on the human counterpart, whereas the human teammate is not completely sure if he would be comfortable at such a robot autonomy. And there also seems to be factors on misinterpretations and delays in the goal and intent recognition component, which can eventually produce some misleading observations and that could eventually reduce the teaming effectiveness. So these are some of the factors which can potentially reduce the effectiveness. And there is also a cognitive overload on the human teammate's counterpart, wherein even though the robot is proactively assisting him, he may not be in a situation to take the help from the robot agent. An example for this situation would be consider a lab environment where the task for a team of a human and a robot would be to type some letters, have it printed and have it delivered to some people in the office. And while the human is typing the document, the robot teammate can figure out his goal that he eventually needs to have it printed out and delivered. So he could fetch the printed documents from the printer and try delivering it to the other people in the office environment. Whereas the human might feel that the robot is slow in doing such a task, so he might prefer to do those things by himself. So that there is a question on if he is willing to adapt to such robot goals in such scenarios. So these are several factors that could potentially that questions the effectiveness of human-robot teams given a proactive support. So I perform a human factor analysis to validate the effectiveness of proactive support in such human-robot teams. And again, I use a similar urban search and rescue scenario setup, which I created in a WebBot simulator to evaluate the effectiveness. And the main difference between the previous setup and this setup is that the human controller who is acting outside the environment controls a robot, which is kind of representative for him. This doesn't have a goal and intent recognition or a proactive support capability. Whereas inside the environment, there is another autonomous robot that acts as a teammate to the human, and this is equipped with, in one case, is equipped with the proactive support ability, and in another case, it doesn't have this ability. So this again is the environmental setup that we have to evaluate the current question in hand. I would go into detail as the next slide comes up. Yeah. As you could see, the aim here would be the overall team goal would be here to find casualties and treat them. So here is how we do it, wherein we have different segments similar to the previous setup. We have doors connecting to the hallway and the other segments inside the room. And we have a casualty search region, which is denoted by the segment starting with R. And we have a medical kit storage regions, which is denoted by the segment starting with S. And there are like 2 medical kits, 1 and 2. And we have the medical triage region, which is starting with letter M. And we have 2 such regions where the human can perform triage on the found out casualties. And as you could see, there are 2 types of casualties. One is critically injured, represented by a red block, and another one is lightly injured casualty, represented by a blue block. And as he said, the human and as well as the robot has to search for the casualties, fetch the medical kits from the storage room, bring it to the medical room, and perform the triage operations. This is kind of the overall setup that we use to evaluate the effectiveness claim here. And there are like several constraints imposed in the environment, wherein once the critical casualty is found, either by a robot teammate or a human teammate, it has to be treated first. And the robot or the human can carry only either a medical kit or a casualty at a single time to reach the medical triage room. And there is a constraint imposed on the human controlled robot that the triage operation can be performed only by the robot that the human operator controls. So we simulate this again by using some secondary puzzles, as we did in the first experiment, wherein the triage operation is basically represented by having the human solve some secondary puzzles. So yeah, this is the autonomous robot acting inside the environment, and this is the human himself. When I mention human himself, I mean the robot that the human controls. It is just a representative agent inside the environment. So these are the actions that the human can perform, which is conduct triage. He can grab or drop the medical kit. He can lift or lay down the casualties that were found. He can move between segments. He can open the door. And apart from these actions, he can also perform other 2 actions through an interactive interface, which is like inform and request. By inform, he is like actively telling the current goal to the autonomous robot working inside the environment. So when he informs his current goal, the autonomous robot inside the environment gets the feel on what the human is trying to achieve, so that it can actively support him by choosing a goal that increases the team ability and computing a plan and carrying it out. Whereas the human also has the capability to request the autonomous robot to stop the current plan that it is executing or undo the current plan. And as I said, here we have 2 kinds of a team. One is the team which offers proactive support, other team that doesn't offer proactive support. But see to that in both the teams we have the automated planner component in it, except that in the proactive support case, the robot has the goal and intent recognition component with it, through which it can infer the current goal of humans and use the planner component. Whereas in the other case, This is the case which does not have the goal and intent recognition component, wherein it has the automated planner component in it. The use of it is that the human and the autonomous robot share the same set of the candidate goals, and the human has his own action that he carries out. So as I said previously, if he chooses to inform actively, this is an optional thing that the human can do in both the scenarios. He can either choose to inform the autonomous robot about his current goals, or he can not choose to do so. So if he informs his current goal to the autonomous robot without proactive support, so then the robot just has the candidate goal set, so it cancels out the current goal that the human is trying to achieve, and from the remaining set of goals, based on the team utility, he chooses a goal and use the automated planner component to evaluate a plan on which it can act on. And these are the actions that the autonomous robot can perform, which again drills down to grabbing or dropping a medical kit, moving across segments, opening door and carrying and lay down cash file keys. See to that, the human has an extra operation called conduct triage, whereas the autonomous robot in both the cases cannot perform the triage operations. And yeah, this is the team which has a proactive support ability, and the components, as you could see, that's the goal and intent recognition component. The human and the robot teammate here still will have the same candidate goal distributed among them, and the human performs his own actions, and again he can have the option to inform his current goal to the robotic agent or not. In this case, even if he doesn't choose to inform about his current goal to the robot, based on the actions that the human controller is performing, the goal and intent recognition component can figure out the goal that the human is trying to achieve. This is done using an off-the-shelf goal and intent recognition component, which basically computes the probability distribution of all the goals, and the goal with the highest probability based on the current observations is the goal that the human is trying to achieve. And based on this goal, it again can perform the same thing that the autonomous robot and the other team does. It can figure out the goal that the human is trying to achieve without him actively announcing it, and it can then use the automated planner component to achieve the goal that it deduced by itself, so that's the goal that improves the teaming utility, and it plans and it executes. So these are the two components which are used in the experimental setup. One is the off-the-shelf automated planner component, which computes a plan given an initial state and a goal state through agent's action, and another one is the goal and intent recognition component, which gives us a probability distribution of all the goals, and the goal with the highest probability is the goal. So to give you a feel on how the experiment proceeds, here is a use case. Considering this is with the robot that has the proactive assistance in it. So considering the human teammate having, see to that when the human is performing an experiment, he doesn't know the position of either the critical or the injured, critically injured or the less injured casualty. He's just given with the map and the locations of the medical kits. But he doesn't know the location where he can find the critically or less injured casualties. Supposing that the human has found a critically injured casualty and the autonomous robot here is still searching for some casualties in the lower search region, the human teammate's current goal would be to bring the detected injured casualty to the medical room, though while the robot is still figuring out what to do in the search region. As and when he picks up this critically injured casualty and crosses the field of view of the CCTV camera, this passes in as an observation to the autonomous robot with the proactive ability still searching for a casualty here. If it finds out that the human has found a critically injured casualty, and if there is still a medical kit in the medical kit region, the robot teammate can help the human teammate perform the triage operation sooner by fetching the medical kit by itself and delivering it to the medical triage room. Whereas there's another case wherein this is the case where the human controller does not inform about his goals. He may even choose to inform the robot that he is working on a goal to carry the critically injured casualty to the medical triage room. In that case, there is no need for the goal and intent recognition component, whereas it can directly as the human directly gives us it's his current goal, it can compute the goal for itself by computing the goal that will have a higher teaming utility. So consider another case wherein if the human controller has found out a critically injured casualty, wherein the robot is still searching in some search space for some casualty. Then it would be the case wherein the robot teammate would still continue searching for critically injured casualty because critically injured casualty achieves higher team utility. So, but if this is the case wherein the human has already found out a critically injured casualty and treated it, it would help him fetch the medical kit from other medical kit regions and performing the triage operations. So having the current goal computed by the autonomous robot, it uses the automated planner component to achieve the goal. So these are the hypotheses that I used to evaluate the effectiveness of such proactive support in the human-robot teams. The first hypothesis states that the robot with the proactive support ability enables more effective teaming, wherein it enables less communication and it enables more efficiency. And my second hypothesis states that the robot with the proactive support ability increases the human teammates' mental workload. And I again evaluate these hypotheses through both subjective as well as objective measures. And these are all the objective factors that I use to evaluate the effectiveness. The first one, as you could see, is the time taken for a team to find out and treat the critically injured casualty. As you could see, this graph denotes the average time taken as a team to complete the entire task. By entire task, I mean finding out and performing triage to both critical as well as the less injured casualty. There seems to be a significant difference in the time for the overall task, whereas there is no such significance. However, there is a difference. The difference is not so significant for the tasks that involve only treating critically injured casualty. This seems to suggest that the human teammates are aware in prioritizing the goals that they need to achieve, whereas it would be the vice versa if they didn't have the awareness on which goal to achieve. And we also had measures that other objective measures wherein this graph tells us the number of times that here Mary is the autonomous robot that we use in the scenario. So this graph gives us the difference in the number of times that the human controller stopped the autonomous robot from executing. So as I said, you could remember the human controller has an option to either inform or stop the current plan that the autonomous robot is executing. So this gives us the number of times that the human actually stopped the autonomous robot from executing. There is also no significant difference, however, in the non-proactive support case, there is a slight increase in the number of times that he happens to interact with the robot. And we also computed...
What does the negative number mean then? -1.
Nice, yeah.
For what? It's not -1, it's